Good evening from the News Radio, 1120 a.m. and 93.7 FM, KPNW Studios. I am Jorge the Magnificent, and I do the wake-up call, 6 a.m. to 9, Monday through Fridays on KPNW. Actually, my real name is Bill London, but you can just call me Gunter. Anyway, news tonight brought to you by Rick Dancer, because Rick believes in local news. As a matter of fact, he's even investing more money into this newscast, and he's actually adding chyrons. And I think that's pretty cool. Nice job. Nice to see that we're picking up our game. All right, here's a look at some of what Rick likes to call dumb Oregon news. Now, I don't know if you remember last year or not. If you don't, that's fine. I'll kind of recap it for you. If you recall last year, without any warning whatsoever, the Army Corps of Engineers drained an entire reservoir right near the little town of Sweet Home that sits kind of in the Cascade foothills in Oregon. And when that happened, well, there were a number of problems. Like, for instance, it killed tens upon thousands of fish. It also ruined a lot of the equipment that's used along the Sandy Am River to purify drinking water. So the water treatment plants in Sweet Home, in Lebanon, and in Albany, costing those towns hundreds of thousands of dollars just to be able to try and get water. It also caused wells to dry up, and it was an utter mess. It was after it happened, and everyone was surprised what happened to the water, that the Army Corps of Engineers came out and said, "Oh yeah, well, we did that because it'll be good for salmon to apparently have them swimming through sludge." And it was all part of a lawsuit, of course, that was brought by environmentalists saying that, yes, we have to do this because otherwise we will not be able to save the salmon. And in the process, it had destroyed the kokanee fishery at that reservoir and had a major effect on Sweet Home's major business, which is tourism. But of course, we have to do it for the environmentalists. Well, guess what? They're not done. They're doing it to another reservoir, and this will be interesting when it happens. The Army Corps of Engineers plans to drop Detroit Lake to the lowest water level in its history next fall in a plan that supposedly, hypothetically, is going to save endangered salmon. And it will also impact fishing, reservoir access, and drinking water in the Sandy Am Canyon all the way down to Salem, the state's capital. It's almost too bad that they're not doing that when the legislature is in session because, well, we'd be able to see some of the fallout. But the reservoir east of Salem would be drawn down to 55 feet below its normal water pool and 30 feet lower than it's ever been taken before to, again, hypothetically, allow baby salmon to migrate through the reservoir and reach the ocean. Then they say it would be refilled before the summer tourism season. Now, they say it's part of a wider strategy to keep dams in place for flood control while reopening habitat blocked for decades to endangered salmon and steelhead that they say are teetering on the brink of extinction. What they fail to mention there is those dams were also creating lots of clean energy. Now, the drawdowns, as I mentioned, have brought significant problems in other locations, and it is expected it will impact the area from the small town of Detroit in the Sandy Am Canyon to Salem, the state's capital, with muddy sludge flowing from the reservoir down the North Sandy Am River and into the drinking water systems of cities that pull from the river, including, yes, the capital city, Salem. It's also expected to destroy the popular kokanee fishery at Detroit Lake, which in the summer, that's a main draw. It's all part of tourism. In addition to reduced numbers of rainbow trout as well, it's going to harm tourism, and along with several months of lost reservoir access in the late fall or winter when it's also popular. And while Detroit Lake would return to its regular summer water level, under normal conditions, it will be much more susceptible to drought in the future. And we've seen how well that drought and low reservoirs actually work out down in California. So Oregon continues its utter disgust for victims and love for perps. Let's introduce you to Mark J. Wilson. He was convicted in a notorious 1987 murder in Terrebonne, Oregon. He killed a Terrebonne couple, he and another person. Well, he was released from prison after serving just 35 years in custody. Now, Wilson shot a man named Rod Hauser 20 times with a rifle while Hauser was standing on the front porch of his house in the middle of the night. Then you have co-defendant Randy Guzek. He shot Rod Hauser's wife, Lois. He shot her in the head, heart, and stomach. That was after he found her inside the couple's home. She was on top of a staircase screaming. Wilson and Guzek then took their time, looting the house, ransacking it. Then they took the family's Bible and put it on Rod Hauser's chest and slit his throat so that they could make it look like it was a cult killing before they fled. Wilson confessed to the killing after their cover story started falling apart and ended up pleading guilty to aggravated murder and felony murder. He was sentenced in 1988 to 2 consecutive life terms. He served 35 years and 8 months in custody. The 55-year-old is now going to work as a legal assistant and policy associate for the Progressive Oregon Justice Resource Center, which has lobbied on his behalf before the State Board of Parole and Post-Prison Supervision. For those of you that don't know anything about the Oregon Justice Resource Center, it's run out of Portland State University, and their goal is to get as many criminals out of prison as possible, particularly those who have very long sentences, because, they do inconvenient things, like shoot somebody 20 times and after they're dead, put a Bible on them and slit their throat. Anyway, the board, and there's more to this story, the board, and I'm talking about the parole board, concluded in 2019 that Wilson was, and I'll quote them, likely to be rehabilitated. Like it makes a difference. His release comes less than a year after the Oregon Department of Corrections agreed to pay Wilson $50,000, erase his discipline record, and process his parole request. Now, you may be asking, why did they pay him $50,000? What's this about discipline? Yeah, you see, the thing was they put him in segregation because he had contraband, namely a fake phone that he had managed to get his hands on in prison. That's a no-no. Now, of course, he sued. Well, he didn't sue. Our friends, the Oregon Justice Resource Center, sued. They claimed that corrections officials placed him in segregation in retaliation for his legal advocacy on behalf of other prisoners. Meg Garvin, the lawyer for the victim's family, urged the parole board to keep Wilson in prison. According to the lawyer, she says, they're disappointed in a broken system that makes truth in sentencing a moving target. Now, as for Guzek, the guy that committed the murder with him, Guzek was on death row. But if you recall, Oregon's governor, Kate Brown, dismantled death row back in 2022. And as a matter of fact, it was at the behest of the Oregon Justice Resource Center that Governor Kotek went on a spree of commutations and paroles for convicted felons, letting many of them out of prison because she said it's cruel to keep them in prison with COVID being prevalent. All right, so Oregon has a legislative session coming up. And you might be curious, well, what are some of the things they're going to be doing, Bill? Oh, please tell us. All right, well, the Oregon legislature meets and opens next Monday, and they will be kicking it off with a proposed House Bill 2995. It would set up a task force to look at the ways in which the state can give reparations to African American people in Oregon. The bill would create a task force to study and develop proposals for financial and non-financial reparations for what it calls past acts of racism. It's sponsored by Representatives Travis Nelson, Shannon Isidore, Andrea Valderrama, and Senators Lou Frederick and James Manning. Now, the task force, the way this bill would have it set up, would include 15 members, 2 senators, 2 representatives, and 11 appointees of the governor. According to the concept bill, the task force would identify governmental actions that have resulted in harm to Oregon African Americans through enslavement, racial terror, political disenfranchisement, housing segregation, separate and unequal education, racism related to the environment and infrastructure, pathologizing the Black family, control over creative, cultural, and intellectual life, stolen labor and hindered opportunity, an unjust labor system, mental and physical harm and neglect, and the wealth gap. Well, Governor Tina Kotek is asking lawmakers to expand where and how middle housing would be located in Oregon. In particular, we're talking things like duplexes and triplexes, even quadplexes, and where and how and when they can be constructed. So House Bill 2138 aims to permit middle housing in more places, including unincorporated land in urban areas. The governor's office on Tuesday wouldn't comment on the bill. The governor said she would talk about it later. So the bill actually adds flexibility to the definition of middle housing, clarifying that duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes can be constructed or attached or detached dwellings configured any way that a developer chooses. The bill proposed changes deals with state versus local control over housing. The governor wants local control, or wants government or state control over housing, and wants to take it away from cities, which she thinks are not doing a good enough job at creating homes. Now, this goes back to, of course, a bill that she was able to get through the legislature last year that was supposed to create 32,000 homes a year in Oregon. Yeah, it's not done that. Essentially, it hasn't really created any homes so far, even though it's had a lot of money spent on that particular program. As a matter of fact, the home building has been anemic, to say the best, and nowhere close to the numbers that it needs to be to actually alleviate its shortage. She thinks by making these changes, well, then cities will have even less say, and maybe she'll get her way. Part of the problem, though, is when it comes to building these homes, well, they actually have to go through, of course, building codes, zoning, permits through counties, cities, municipalities, and in some cases, even the state. And if you want to know why that there's not a whole lot of construction in Oregon, it's because of that and the cost. It doesn't make any difference what the governor wants. It's what people are willing to invest their money in and whether they'll get any money back out of it. And we'll leave with this. The Oregon legislative session is also going to take up the issue of a grand funding package for the Oregon Department of Transportation, one of Oregon's biggest black holes. ODOT says it needs, at the bare minimum, another nearly $2 billion a year to pay for capital projects to better serve DMV customers and maintain roughly 8,000 miles of roads. Now let's flash back to 2017. That was the year the legislature passed the largest ever funding package for ODOT at $5.3 billion. They were given $5.3 billion. And to date, the agency has not finished, or in many cases, even started the signature projects that the state promised at the time. The transportation co-chair, Democrat Chris Gorsuch, says, yeah, we're probably looking at another $5 billion this go around as well. What the hell? It's everybody else's money they're spending. What's the problem with that? Oh, and speaking of which, I just found out about this earlier this afternoon. Now, property taxes in Oregon are paid to and at the county level. Then, of course, you have state income taxes. Well, now the state wants to have a state property tax on top of the county property taxes, on top of income taxes, and their ability to get something like that passed through this Oregon legislature. Democrats have a supermajority in the House and the Senate. Just a little good news to end the broadcast. This look at the news brought to you by Rick Dancer, because Rick's a good guy and he invests in chyrons. All right, get real, Rick.